Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Community Table. Community Table discussions are talks we're hosting every month here at Beyond Type 1 around crucial issues within the diabetes community faced by both Type 1s and Type 2s. I'm Jordan, the Director of Programs at Beyond Type 1, and I'm going to hand it off momentarily to an amazing group of panelists because tonight we're discussing mental health and burnout. But before I hand it off to these guys, I just want to thank all of you joining in Zoom and on Facebook Live, as well as those who make our conversations at the Community Table possible. Community Table is presented by the JDRF-Beyond Type 1 Alliance and made possible with support from Abbott Diabetes Care, Dexcom, Lilly Diabetes, MannKind, Medtronic, Omnipod, Roche Diabetes Care, and Tandem. As you're all tuning in tonight, if you have questions, please feel free to drop those either into the chat on Zoom or into the comments on Facebook. We're gonna try to do our best to answer those towards the end of the conversation. For now, I'm gonna ask our amazing panelists to go ahead and come on video, and I'm gonna hand it off to Taylor, who's gonna be moderating this conversation. Taylor, please feel free to take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Jordan, and welcome everybody to Community Table. Really glad to be here and excited to get to chat with everybody and hear our experiences as we talk about mental health and diabetes burnout. And I'm sure as many of you understand, burnout is quite common in the diabetic community. The constant maintenance of diabetes never ends. And so it can lead to some different things happening, fluctuations in our blood sugar, having different mood swings, anxiety, depression, even eating disorders. So this is going to be an exciting topic to dive into and hear different perspectives on how we have worked through our mental health and dealing with the burnout. But before we get into that, I know you guys want to know who these faces are on screen, so we'll take some time to have everybody introduce themselves. I will go first. My name is Taylor. I have been a diabetic for almost 6 years now. I am type 2. And one big thing about me is growing up in Texas, you are surrounded by a lot of good food. So one of my burnout issues is being surrounded by so much good food and trying not to eat it all. From there, I will hand it off to Mila. Mila, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Hola, everyone. My name is Mila Ferrer. I am a D mom. My son was diagnosed at the age of 3. We are going to be celebrating his 15th anniversary this year. He's a high performance athlete. And as a parent, I know that all the parents are going to identify with what I'm going to say. We feel that everything that we do needs to be perfect. And when things don't go the way we want or we plan, we start to feel like we're the worst parents in the world. So that plays a very heavy burden on us parents, and that can lead to diabetes burnout really quick. So we'll be talking about that.
Thank you, Mila. Thank you so much for that introduction. Kiyomi, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Hello, my name is Kiyomi and I'm a type 1 diabetic. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 15 years old. I'm now 34 years old, so I've had diabetes for a while. I think it's really important to actually talk about mental health and mental illness in conjunction, because I think sometimes mental illness kind of falls by the wayside when we're talking about mental health. We're talking about solutions and coping mechanisms and grounding techniques. And I think it's really important to also kind of talk about the darker side of those that are impacted with diabetes and how it impacts others that are around them. So I speak a lot on my personal Instagram page about mental health, and I wanted to come on here and share my experience as well as talk about experiences that I've heard from others being told to me, their stories. So yes, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Kiyomi. And pretty excited because we also have a doctor in the house, Dr. Roy Collins. Hello, how are you? Please introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Roy. I'm a type 1 diabetic, was diagnosed 16 years ago when I was 13. Diabetes has really impacted my life in multiple ways. I was also a high performance athlete. I played college football at Yale prior to going to medical school. And now I'm a psychiatry resident at Stanford University School of Medicine. So, diabetes burnout certainly plays a role in my personal life as I was trying to manage it with sports and at my current high performance job. But obviously as a mental health professional, I like to study it as well in conjunction with chronic disease such as diabetes. So I'm glad to be here and talk to all and hopefully help employ you all with skills and coping mechanisms to deal with burnout.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Roy. I'm sure we're going to have some pretty interesting questions, both personally and professionally, because it's a lot when you're dealing with mental health and a chronic illness. So really excited for that. And last, but certainly not least, and it's kind of interesting because I live in Austin, but Austin, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, everybody. My name's Austin Davis. I've had diabetes for 21 years. I'm super excited to be here tonight and offer any sort of guidance that I can. A little bit of background about myself. I went to school, my undergrad at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and I went to law school at Creighton University, where I have a certificate in health law. A fun but interesting fact about myself, I also have a pet rabbit named Penelope.
Very interesting. I don't know if I thought about raising any pets outside of dogs and cats. I have 2 dogs myself. So really cool. Well, thank you all for being here and your time today. Let's get into it. We got a lot of questions to go through, and I'm sure the audience would have a lot of questions for you as well. So the first question that I'd like to ask is, love to get to know y'all's diagnosis story and kind of the emotions that you felt at that time. What were you kind of going through? What were your immediate feelings with that? Because we all know hearing a diagnosis like this isn't exactly exciting news. So curious if you're willing to share what those emotions are. And Ms. Mila, we'll start with you.
Sure. As I mentioned, my son was diagnosed when he was 3. So he was really, really young. We noticed all the symptoms, and this is something that I'm super passionate about because I feel that he was very lucky. We were very lucky. He had all the symptoms, but we were lucky enough not to be diagnosed on DKA. At first, it feels like they push you into this black hole, and you're just like spinning and spinning. You're getting a lot of education. You're talking to diabetes educators, to the social worker, doctors, but there are so many things in your mind. And of course, I felt very angry because I thought it was my fault. The first thing I thought it was like, what did I do wrong? Like, how could I cause this on my 3-year-old? I was sad. I was upset. Why him? Why our family? We've done everything. He's been taken care excellent. So I was very upset, and it took me, thankfully, it didn't took me a long time to recover from that because I met a lot of different families and I started talking to them and I started learning and understanding this disease. Once I first understood that it was not my fault, there was nothing I could do to prevent it. That was a big side, like a big relief for me as a mom. Of course, I cried, I think, for the first 6 months. And the first insulin injection that we did at home by ourselves, I remember being crying. I'm like, how could me as a mom can inflict some pain on him? And I remember like I would hug him and kiss him and try to explain to him, mom is doing this because she wants you to be okay. I want you to go out and play and be strong and play with your brothers. But it was very tough, especially since he was so young. I was so afraid. I remember losing tons of night without sleeping, reading and trying to understand what was going on. But it was like a very, very confused couple of first months, trying to learn as much as we could as a family, and then trying to understand and observing him and his behavior, trying to figure out his low, his high. Of course, we ended up checking his blood sugars 1 million times a day without any CGMs. But I think it's very normal to feel the fear, the being anxious. But at the same time, if we turn that into a positive, it's a great way to step over and say, okay, we got this and we're going to move forward.
Wow, Mila, thank you so much for sharing that and for your vulnerability, because I can only imagine as a parent, like you said, that kind of guilt of, why is this happening? And you just want your child to grow up and be happy. But I'm glad that you guys have found ways to look at the positive side and kind of move forward and providing him with, some semblance of a normal childhood. I think after the past year, nobody knows what normal is anymore, but definitely appreciate your thoughts on that. Kiyomi, would love to know your diagnosis story and the emotions and things that you felt when you first received the news.
So my diagnosis story was a little bit different. I was actually misdiagnosed with the flu. So I went to Kaiser with my symptoms. I was going to the bathroom probably like every 30 minutes to an hour, and I wasn't feeling well. I had the virus, and I went home, and my family was giving me apple juice and orange juice. My dad was buying me Jamba Juice, and they just told me to drink a lot of fluids. My uncle Kevin, who's like my father, he actually was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes as a teenager himself. So he kind of picked up on some of my symptoms and decided to test my blood sugar, and it wouldn't even give us a reading. So they took me to the hospital, and I was admitted into the hospital, and they diagnosed me with type 1. I was a teenager at that time. I was scared. I didn't understand that I was going to have to be on insulin injections when I was first diagnosed. I just thought, oh, it's what my uncle has. And it didn't click to me that I would have to have injections for the rest of my life. So when the nurse came in and, was trying to instruct me on how to do it, that's when it finally hit me. And I fell apart as a teenager. And I was diagnosed with depression prior to actually my diagnosis. So with my diagnosis, it kind of led me into a deeper era of depression. And for me, I experienced suicidal ideations, and I actually had 3 attempts of suicide from the age of 18 up until I would say 24, 25. So I just wanted to get on here and say that, there are individuals that are comfortable with talking about the deep depths of depression with diabetes and how that can actually be a complex trauma. So my experience was different from a lot of others' experience, but I wanted to share.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's really powerful to be open about what your diagnosed experience is, because I had something similar. I was diagnosed at 25. I'm 31 now, and you guys have the experiences of as a kid, and I can't even fathom, having to spend your years where you're really developing, trying to understand what's going on with you. And here I am as an adult, and I'm just trying to, make my way in the corporate life, right? And trying to still somewhat do habits of the college ways. I learned really fast not to do that. But having to navigate that and the darkness and depression that sets in because you're recognizing that the things that you used to do, you can't do anymore, or you have to do it a different way, as I found later on. So very much kudos to you guys for doing it so young. And I'm still a baby in it, I guess, trying to figure it out and making sure I'm doing the right thing. So thank you so much for your vulnerability in that. Dr. Roy, I kind of have a double whammy for you. I definitely want to hear your story of your diagnosis, but I also kind of want to understand what are some of the emotions and experiences that people have after diagnosis as a, mental health professional, and, what are resources or things that you can recommend to other caregivers or friends and family, as someone is going through their first diagnosis?
Okay, well, quite the doozy of a question. I will quickly go through my diagnosis story because I think it's similar to everyone else's. I had about a week's worth of polyuria, polydipsia, the official word. So that's the frequent urination and thirst. My mother's a pediatrician, so picked up on it fast. But I still had the same emotional outbursts that a lot of people do. It was very scary. My grandfather had type 2 diabetes. So as far as I knew, diabetes meant you checked your blood sugar maybe in the morning and had a lot of sugar-free syrup when you ate your waffles. I didn't really know it was anything else. And so luckily, my family sort of came together and was very supportive of me, but it was certainly an emotional time. When we think about what happens when folks are diagnosed, I think the simplest thing to do would be look at your Psych 101 textbook and the stages of grief, right? Going from shock and denial, pain and guilt, anger and bargaining, depression, upward turn, and then lastly, acceptance and hope. And so hopefully some of the things we talk about will get folks closer to that acceptance and hope at the last stage of the stage of grief. And, diabetes is obviously a very shocking and difficult, place for a lot of people. But what we want to do is help people better cope with the things that come with diabetes, and really acceptance is a big part of that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I definitely had never thought about the stages of grief in that, you know, and I think that's something really important. It's not assuming that you're not allowed to not be okay. And I think when I was diagnosed, that was one of the biggest things that I struggled with is I thought I wasn't allowed to be upset about it. I thought I wasn't allowed to, you know, cry and grieve and go through those things because, you know, no one else around me besides my parents who are also diabetics, you know, understood that, but they weren't, you know, diagnosed as a young adult. They had a family, you know, and things like that. So the different perspectives of going through that process, it's really important to understand that you can grieve and you can, you know, feel like, hey, this kind of sucks, right? So thank you for that. I appreciate that. All right, Austin, would love to hear your diagnosis story and those emotions and feelings that you felt when you were first diagnosed.
Absolutely. So I was diagnosed when I was 6 years old, and at the time I was super into Power Rangers. And so when I went into the hospital, I imagined myself basically like a captive in a Power Rangers episode and thought that I should try to escape all the doctors and nurses. And when your blood sugar is like 800, that's pretty hard to do as a 6-year-old. So it didn't go well. I was definitely terrified out of my mind and just very confused as to why people were sticking me with things and trying to understand what was going on. What's cool about my diagnosis story is the on-call physician became my regular diabetes doctor, and he's played a huge role in my life and guiding my career path forward. So there's definitely a purpose for me being diagnosed on the night that I did. And even though I turned out as an adult not to be a Power Ranger, I thought that was a scary but important part of my diabetes journey.
Wow, thank you. So I'm gonna have to ask, who was your favorite?
I think it was the Red Ranger. I have a picture of myself from then. I'll probably try to keep that hidden for as long as I can from the rest of the world. But if it ever gets out there and is public, I'll make sure I share it with you guys.
Yeah, definitely have to send that to me. Yellow Ranger to me was the ultimate, and then second was Black Ranger. Um, Classic, love it. Thank you so much for sharing. All right, so second question for you guys is, you know, we know burnout is different for everybody. And so curious to know, what did that look like for you? And, you know, how long after you were diagnosed did you kind of realize that you were having this burnout moment? And what were some ways that you were able to bring yourself out of that? Because we know that sometimes when things happen that are, you know, honestly traumatic to us, we can stay in that headspace a little too long. And so I'm just curious how you guys were able to recognize that you were in this space and how you brought yourself out. Ms. Mila, we'll start with you.
So as a parent, diabetes burnout, you have to, at least in my opinion, you have to try to snap out of it as soon as possible. Because for me, it was very important not to let my son see me like super down or like seeing or managing his diabetes in a very poor way. Because my thought process was, I need to be an example. And of course, he's going to see that, oh my God, I'm upset because our blood sugars the blood sugars are not where we want them. We've been doing everything that we should be doing, but today is not one of those days. And I think it was very important for him meeting other kids with type 1 too. And for him going to different conferences and listening and hearing and understanding that it's okay to be upset sometimes. It's okay to cry if your diabetes is not working. So we had nights when we both cried together because, oh my God, we're so tired. The blood sugar is not going down. We're sleepy, or his blood sugar is not coming up. He's been an athlete all his time, all his life. And the insulin pumps that we were using before were not as smart as now. So there was a lot of frustration many times. And for me, like I would say, okay, I'm just gonna leave that Dexcom alarm sound like another hour. But inside me, I would start thinking, oh my God, like his eyesight, his kidneys. And like 5 minutes later, I was up again, checking his blood sugar, making sure everything's okay. So for me, it was like very short periods where I was like, okay, I'm done. I would wake up my husband, it's your turn now. And I think giving us that, okay, now tonight, it's going to be your night. I had a bad night 3 nights ago. So that gave us that balance, that whenever he saw that I was down or I was like super tired, he's like, okay, stay in bed. I'll take care of the kids. Don't worry. And I feel that's why having that support and having a strong network around you works fine. I am very blessed to have good friends that live with type 1, that are adults, have been growing with type 1, and they were my soundboard. I would go to them like, what will you do? What should I have done different? And okay, we are having this issue. How should I talk to Jaime about what's going on? And one of the things that we've always tried to use to inspire or motivate him to stay on top of his diabetes is sports, because that's what he loves. And I know things are going to get complicated. He's been playing sports his entire life, but now it's going to be different. He's going to be out of our house. He's going to be managing on his own. And as Dr. Roy said, that brings a lot of burnout too. He's going to be, oh my God, I have a very important game. He's a catcher, so he needs to be on top of his game. And he needs to make sure that he's thinking and his mind, it's on the game. It's not on how my blood sugar is. Am I low? Am I high? So I know there's a lot of hurdles that we're still going to be going through, but I feel that technology is a great support right now. And also being able to ask, and okay, I had a rough day today. My blood sugars were high or they were too low. I need to do something. And being able to identify what's causing that. Is it, okay, am I going high? I'm not sleeping enough, or am I going too low? I'm not performing how I would like to do, and then work on that issue. It's the only way. And it can be very, very hard for parents, but I think at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we understand that they are looking at us as examples. And at least that's how I see it. I feel that if I keep complaining and being like, oh my God, it's so difficult, it's so tough, I feel that's how my son's gonna perceive his diabetes management too.
Wow, yeah, you bring up a really great point about being a caregiver for somebody who has diabetes, and that deep empathy, because you're kind of standing in for them in a way until they're able to get to a point where they can manage themselves. So, the burnout experience isn't just with the person who has it, it's kind of in your circle too, especially if they're so close, like a parent is. So thank you for sharing, your experience with that, and that you found community even with your partner to kind of, tag you in and out to make sure that you're able to be supportive for your son. That's really awesome. Naomi, I would love to understand what burnout looks for you and how you kind of brought yourself out of that space when you were recognizing that you were going through it. You're still muted.
Sorry about that. I would say burnout for me now looks very different from burnout from when I was a teenager. So when I was first diagnosed and I experienced my first burnout, it was probably within the first few weeks actually of being diagnosed. I remember that first year of diagnosis being very challenging, very difficult, and I didn't understand the different symptoms that were happening in my body. So I slept a lot. Sometimes I would not take my insulin, or there would be times where I just wouldn't eat. Or there would be times where, my mom would try to come in and say, hey, let's check your blood sugar. And I wasn't on board with any of it. I didn't want it. I didn't want to accept it. I think acceptance plays a major role in diabetes burnout. Even as an adult, sometimes I have a hard time with accepting that this is my reality. Until I poke my finger and I'm like, okay, this is what I've got to do until I take my insulin injection. Because if I don't take my insulin, then I start to feel really, really crummy when my blood sugar is really high. And that's when, as an adult, I notice, hey, am I lacking in self-care? Am I starting to allow the depression to kind of take over? I was also diagnosed with 5 other autoimmune conditions as well: lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, things of that nature. So I have other illnesses that play into my diabetes management. So when I'm doing a great job with managing my diabetes, here comes lupus with something, or here comes rheumatoid arthritis with something, and then it kind of throws my balance off. So it's kind of like being on a constant roller coaster, and being on that roller coaster, sometimes I want to just get off or I want to give up. But I do notice that I'll start to experience heavier depression, or I won't want to food prep as much. I won't want to make meals that are healthier. I'll want to reach for the quicker meals because I want something quick and fast versus, something that's going to be a lot healthier for myself. So I would say as an adult, it looks different. As a kid, you kind of rely on your caregivers a little bit because there's a certain dependency that kind of takes place. But then once you're an adult, it's all you. And that can just create so much pressure and it's really uncomfortable. So kudos to anyone that has gone through burnout. I know that it looks different for everyone, but it's also really challenging to pull yourself out of. So if you can pull yourself out of that, that's a plus.
Yeah, absolutely. Any win is a win for everybody because
Right.
some days are really tough, and we have to be able to take that moment to rest and allow ourselves that moment to be in it, because those emotions are valid, but also recognizing coming out of it and not staying in that place. So major kudos to you, especially with everything that you have, and being able to notice that transition and adjust accordingly. Dr. Roy, would be interested in your experience with burnout and, especially as a medical professional, how do you manage your burnout while also having to support others and kind of their mental health with that burnout?
Sure. So I conceptualize burnout into kind of three major domains. One being energy depletion, the other being detachment, and third being powerlessness. In my own life, I experienced those three mostly when I was in high school, when I was trying to, be recruited for football and kind of manage myself. I see Tom in the chat is asking sort of when is it better to be diagnosed, earlier or later? Can't really speak to that, but I can certainly say being diagnosed as a teenager is tough because you think that you're grown, but you don't nearly have the prefrontal cortex maturation to make any type of long-term decisions. And so as a result, I was just sort of saying, well, I know right now I want to keep playing, therefore I'm gonna have my blood sugar be higher because I can't think about those long-term effects and I'd be feeling miserable. And so I remember accidentally leaving my glucometer at home when I would go see my endo because I knew the numbers would be crazy and just feeling really bad at myself in the meantime. Now as someone who has to kind of take care of others, there's definitely the sort of, if you guys have flown, I know we're all in a pandemic, but you remember when they say kind of put on your oxygen mask first before you put it on someone else's. That's sort of the methodology I take right now. I try and make sure that in order to take care of others, that I am kind of taking care of myself. I'm incorporating mindfulness. I meditated even before this meeting now because I had a long day at the hospital before I kind of came on. And I knew that if I didn't, take the methods and steps in order to sort of calm myself and be at a place where I can really give myself to this webinar, I wouldn't be worth anything. And so generally speaking, whether you're a caregiver or whether you have diabetes yourself, make sure that you're taking those steps for mindfulness, meditation, or what have you, even just sort of distraction and all those sort of non-pharmacological ways or pharmacological ways if that's something you need to sort of make sure that things are going to go well and you have, balance in order to take care of yourself or take care of others.
Yeah, great point, Dr. Roy. I think the idea of self-care has shifted so much because we think of it as, a spa day or a bubble bath or, having somebody do things for us. But self-care is just as much those smaller actions of, taking that 5-minute walk or taking a breath or meditating before you get into something. I see it as, take a second to check in with yourself. And before you do the next action, are you aligned and okay with what you're about to do? Because if not, that can bleed out into other areas. So absolutely make sure that yourself and your mind and your spirit is all aligned before you jump into the next thing because it can affect others. Thank you for that. All right, Austin, would love to know what burnout means for you and ways that you have pulled yourself out when you recognized that you were going through that.
Yeah, so burnout for me is just a slow and kind of gradual buildup of a lot of small things that eventually make me feel like I cannot manage my diabetes in any given time period. Just a couple weeks ago, like I had a week where I had to change my site 4 or 5 times in a week just because I kept walking by door handles and ripping it off. And at the end, I had to, like the 4th or 5th time, it was a new door handle. It was my car door handle. So I had to laugh at myself a little bit and be like, that's a new handle. Never saw that one there before. I think the best way to deal with burnout generally is to, if you have a larger problem, is to break it down into smaller problems. Take it step by step. For example, if you're having a lot of highs in a given week, or you're having a lot of lows, just for a week or whatever time period you need, try to have one less high a day or one less low a day, and take those small gradual steps until you can get your where you want to be.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Austin. You know, I'll kind of chime in with my idea of burnout. For me, it was falling out of motivation or discipline. That's how I knew that I was struggling with something. And for me, you know, you guys had caregivers. I did have my parents as support in a way, but, you know, they're 3 hours away from me. So it was mostly me by myself. And kind of similar to you, Kiyomi, like I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to eat right. And I tend to go into what I call hermit crab mode, where I don't talk to people, I don't respond to people. And sometimes my friends have to yell at me a little bit of like, we haven't heard from you, are you okay? And it's because I'm, you know, sitting in the corner of my house, like freaking out because I can't seem to get it right. And, you know, I definitely, when I was diagnosed early on, I didn't want to take the medication. As a type 2, you know, the standard drug that they put you on is metformin. And if nobody's ever experienced metformin, it's not exactly fun on your stomach. And so even going through the side effects of medication was really stressful, because I still want to go hang out with my friends. I still want to do happy hour. I still want to, you know, do all of the things. And you have this, what feels like huge weight on your shoulders. And I felt like I couldn't talk to anybody about it because nobody really understood. And even though my parents kind of understood, they weren't my age. They weren't living by themselves at 25 and working a full-time job. They had a family. They had, you know, all these things that they had to do. And so it took me telling my friends, this sucks and I kind of need y'all support, because I didn't know how to talk about it, you know. And so I think that's kind of a big theme here, is having community support or people to go to, and recognizing to care for yourself as well. And also, like, you know, like you said, Austin, baby steps. I was trying to meet this huge milestone of I need to drop my A1C to this number, and not realizing sometimes it's a gradual process. So, you know, great points, everybody. Really do appreciate it. All right, so we've got about 20 minutes left, and want to leave some room for some questions. So at this point, we'll just kind of do it, excuse my trainer brain, but popcorn style. So I'll read the question out from the audience, and whoever wants to volunteer, or if multiple of you want to speak, go for it. We'll go from there. Sound good? All right, so the first question that we have here, do you think that having access to diabetes education can change our emotional health and perspectives, and for caregivers, or for people living with diabetes and for caregivers?
Can I jump in? As a parent, I think understanding what type 1 is, and I am a problem solver. I need to organize everything, and I need to have plan from plan A through plan Z, like what if? And for me, diabetes education has been my foundation to understand, okay, this is the lifestyle my son wants to have. This is what I have to prepare him for. So game night, the night before the game, this is the meal that we're gonna eat. You have to sleep certain amount of hours. Like this is the food. Like for us, it's very squared. And sometimes when people ask us like, hey, have you tried this new restaurant? We're like, yeah, we're not that adventurous with food, because we know how certain food works on him, and we just want to stay like on the safe side. So for me, understanding how to prepare, what happens if, or what could happen, and how I need to be ready for if the insulin pump fails, if the sensor fails, if the insulin goes bad. Like I try to have every possible scenario in my brain and be prepared and ready for that. And that's what we have been teaching him. Like, okay, you have to be ready for everything and anything. If you go out, if you're traveling with your team and the flight gets delayed, don't ever like, please always carry your diabetes supplies. You don't want for them to get lost in luggage and things like that. So for me, understanding what I need, what I have to do, what are the steps, and where to go and look for that information, or having the team around you to ask those questions has been vital. So for me, diabetes education goes very hand in hand with diabetes, with mental health, because you understand and you know what to do. You're better prepared to manage and face like a lot of the things that diabetes is going to throw at you.
Awesome, thank you for that. If anybody else wants to weigh in.
I would just quickly say that diabetes can be very isolating, both for the person with diabetes and for their caregivers. And so if there's an interested party that you know that has diabetes, educating yourself can be very helpful, just so you can, you know, try and participate in all this new lingo and all this new vocabulary and, you know, these different circumstances you would never know. The only caveat I would say is, especially for those without diabetes, so the caregivers or even the friends of caregivers, try and meet that person with some empathy and kind of, you know, have that knowledge as a background, but don't impose upon them your understanding of diabetes. That's certainly going to turn folks away. So good to educate yourself, but definitely kind of meet people where they are.
Awesome, thank you for that. Anyone else want to weigh in? We'll move on to the next question. Now, this one's kind of a twofer. We'd like to know from everybody, you know, outside of burnout, were there any other mental health battles that you faced while living with diabetes, and how long did it take for you to feel better, even emotionally speaking, with those outside influences as well as your diagnosis?
So I'll go. I actually was diagnosed with complex PTSD, as well as anxiety and depression. And with these diagnoses, there's a lot of symptoms that go into it. And like Dr. Roy said, diabetes alone can feel very isolating. And I think that is one of the coping mechanisms that was unhealthy that I developed, which was isolating myself from friends and family and getting to a space to where I felt so alone with it that I did not have any support. I think also as a type 1 diabetic and being diagnosed, although there were classes that I can go to at the beginning of my diagnosis, I feel like I learned more from the diabetic community online about my disease and educating myself. That also made it a lot easier for me to manage, especially during times of burnout. And I think it is really important to communicate. And I think that communication and access to education and access to support and resources is really, really important. It's vital. And I know that without that, that is also kind of what led to the mental health burn, as well as the suicidal ideations, as well as the times where I fell so deep and dark into depression that I felt like I went from helpless to hopeless extremely fast. And I know that there are other diabetics that are out there that experience mental burnout or mental health challenges as well, and they're afraid to speak up. And I think it's so important that you speak up, whether it's to your doctor, whether that's to a friend, whether it's to a family member. Of course, professionals are more, we suggest that you speak to a professional, but if you can at least just talk to one person about what you're going through, it can make all the difference. So I'll speak to that on my mental health challenges.
Thank you for sharing that, Kiyomi. Anyone else, or Dr. Roy, would you like to weigh in on that as well?
Always. I'll speak to the anxiety aspect of diabetes care, certainly with both hyper and hypo, but I think with hypo is probably going to really ring true with most. One of the most insidious parts about anxiety is not only like the distress that comes with an adverse event like a hypoglycemia, but it's the anticipatory nature. You're anticipating the low, therefore you sort of get yourself revved up prior. And diabetes, in your way that you manage it, can be very reactionary, right? You're just trying to kind of follow the wave. And for those of if you're not being proactive at any point, you're just being reactionary. That's how you kind of get the sawtooth lines on your CGM as you're kind of going from high to low and low to high. And so really kind of taking matters into your own hands and being as proactive as possible is, while it can feel very overwhelming, is going to be very important, because you're going to reduce that amount of anticipatory anxiety as your blood sugar goes up and down. And so, one thing I really want to emphasize is trying to set aside time, maybe once a week, maybe a couple times a week, to really kind of, make management changes, or to like really kind of look at your blood sugars. That way you're not simply kind of reading off your glucometer or off your CGM and getting yourself into this kind of negative thought process or cycle, and being reactionary.
Wow, thank you for that. This next question, Austin, I think this question is actually for you, since you've already touched on it a little bit. And Mila, I actually would also like for you to weigh in, from a caregiver perspective, but do you guys ever deal with burnout with tech, like CGMs, like pumps, things like that? And what advice would you give around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have definitely felt like throwing my pump at the wall, or doing something else, or just going back to shots for a little bit when I've been very burnt out on tech or having insertion problems. I think it's really easy. Is diabetes technology has come so far in the last 30 years. But it still isn't a functioning pancreas at the end of the day. So we do have to allow a little bit of grace for our tech, but it's totally understandable and relatable to have issues with that tech. I think the best thing to do sometimes is just give yourself a break. Take 5 minutes. If you're going too high, give yourself a shot. If you're low, you're going to have to treat that as well. So the best thing is just try to be a little bit easier on yourself. It is super frustrating, and I find that a very good and relatable question. So thank you for that.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, so as a parent, yeah, diabetes, burnout, and also my son as the user experienced that. I'm not sure why, but the day that you need that CGM to be the most accurate is the day where it decides to go bunkers. Your blood sugars are off, like even up to 90 points, and you're like, oh my God, why today? And when you start using new technology, sometimes you ask yourself, why did I change? Why am I doing this? Like, is it worth it? And my son has never taken a break from the pump or the CGM, because he feels more safe while he's playing sports with that. And that's something that I'm not sure if that's going to happen, if he's going to keep doing that, and that's going to be his choice. But as burnout, talking about burnout and technology, sometimes you just want to just take the pump, put it in the drawer, shut down the CGM, and just don't even look at it. Especially when you're having insertion sites that are going bad. We used to be on the pod, and he would leak insulin, and we're like, okay, we're wasting insulin. His blood sugar is high. We've been trying all day. This is the third pod or something like that, or the CGM's not working. So it's very easy to get burnout. At the same time, when you sit back and you realize, okay, thankfully I have access to it, and it's a great tool. And of course, we have to understand these products are still in development. They're gonna get better, and just hoping for the best. Like I feel we're always hoping for that new technology that's gonna make life a little bit easier. But also, one of the things that I'm very that I keep talking to my son is that we cannot be 100% dependable on it. We have to know what to do if the insulin pump stops working. We have to remember, we need to check your blood sugar if you feel that CGM reading, it doesn't feel accurate to you. So we have to be ready. And that also brings burnout, because you're like, oh, well, I have my CGM. I don't have to carry my test strips and my meter anymore. I'm sorry, buddy, you do have to carry it. You never know when you're gonna need it. Like, I don't leave my house, or he doesn't leave the house without an insulin pen, just in case something happens. So it's very easy to get tired of doing the side changes, like every 3 days, like, ugh. And I can see it on his face, like, okay, it's pump change, It's like, "Ugh, again, so fast." Like, and I have to understand if he decides that he's like, okay, I'm done for a while, even though I'm gonna go crazy probably, I have to respect that. But as a parent, you have to be very open-minded, especially when they keep growing and they start making their own choices.
You actually just said the mom advice that I needed, because this past weekend I had my first uh, CGM sensor just fall off. And I was wearing long sleeves on top of that. And I literally was like, my sensor's gone. And my partner's like, we're both looking around on the floor, like, where did it go? And I didn't have my normal test strip meter on me. And we were out. And so it was kind of like, okay, I got fruit snacks in his pocket. So if anything gets weird or I feel weird, I can do that. And I think my 2 cents with that would be, don't be afraid to reach out to the companies that provide this tech. I use the Libre 2, and I reached out to them and said, hey, I had a sensor fall off a week early, and they were really generous in working with me, and I've got a new sensor on the way, so I don't have to burn a refill on my prescription. So work with the providers too, because it's feedback that they need in order to make our tech better. All right. So, Dr. Roy, we have a question for you. Can you speak to the effect of stress and cortisol on insulin resistance? It adds to the cycle of burnout. And after 45 years, this is the one that's always hardest to balance and pull out of.
Yeah. So a lot of different ways you can go with that question. I'll try to kind of address it in a few that I hope will make sense. So as it seems like you're kind of picking up on, certainly higher levels of cortisol and stress will make you more resistant, and therefore make the insulin that you deliver less effective, right? And so for example, I would, even in my own life, we'd have morning football practice, and I used to have like a natural kind of morning rise. And so I would like use a lot more insulin than I would for like an afternoon or evening workout. And so they're like insulin adjustments you should sort of be making, as you become more burnt out and more stressed over time, your body is fortunately kind of working against you a little bit. So the amount of cortisol that you produce starts to rise because your body becomes desensitized to it. And so as you can then imagine, right, there's kind of a natural ability to be less or more resistant and less sensitive to insulin as you have this higher level of cortisol and stress. So what do you do? Again, you need to sort of be thoughtful about, are there certain times of the day? Do I have that kind of sunrise in my blood sugar, or am I in a place where I am, just so stressed out over a long period of time that I'm being desensitized to my own cortisol and therefore more resistant? And be, again, kind of proactive. I'm going to probably sound like a broken record, but you need to find ways then to sort of take down that stress and lower that cortisol. It could be very insidious again. High levels of cortisol and that desensitization is very prevalent in people who have chronic mental illness, such as depression. And it's not going to necessarily turn around in a day either. So, working out ways to sort of decrease your stress, decrease that cortisol level is ultimately going to make you more sensitive to insulin and have your diabetes easier to manage.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. All right. So the next question, I think is a really good one, but I'll try to paraphrase it as much as I can. So we have someone who has been having type 1 diabetes since they were really young, like about 3 years old. And they're experiencing issue after issue, and they're in college now, and they're having really terrible burnout. And so they're just wanting some advice from you guys on how do you manage that when it seems like you're having back-to-back issues and it's kind of like you can't catch a break. I would love for each of you to give a piece of advice to that.
I'm actually currently in college now, and if it was not for the resources that I have at my college, I don't think I would be where I'm at currently. There are resources for those that have disabilities. There are also other outside programs that my school offers, as well as mental health resources, any type of conditions that you may have. There are support groups. So I would say look into your resources at your school. That would be my first suggestion. My second suggestion would be prioritizing yourself, prioritizing your mental health, prioritizing your self-care, prioritizing your schedule, prioritizing your diabetes management. Even if that's putting something in your calendar, that's my second tip, would be to prioritize, because it's not easy doing college and dealing with chronic illness and dealing with your mental illness on top of it, if you are dealing with mental illness. But mental health is for everyone. And I think it's really important that we have different levels and different types of self-care. And like Dr. Roy was talking about meditation, I use meditation. I like to use yoga. I love breathing techniques. Somatic breathing is really helpful for me before and after a test. I also am able to get like test extension, as well as like other resources where I can take tests with my teachers on a Zoom call. So I had an experience where I actually had an anxiety attack when I was supposed to be giving a presentation, and I checked my blood sugar in the middle of the presentation and it was really low. My class was extremely supportive and my teacher just allowed me to recite it to him directly on a Zoom call. So I would definitely suggest looking into resources, because your teachers can be on board with you and be just as supportive as any other staff on your team.
So I totally forgot to give some more practical skills. So just real quick. So exercise in general, but specifically resistance training really increases your insulin sensitivity and decreases your insulin resistance. Exercise in general improves neuroplasticity. So that's the way in which your neurons connect to one another. And the reason in which your cortisol is too high is because what's called HPA axis is dysregulated. And so you want to try and kind of form new neural connections, and exercise is a big help for that. Sorry.
Hey, if you want to go ahead and give some advice about back-to-back burnout experiences, would love to hear that from your personal experience as well as from a health professional.
Was that directed at somebody? Sorry.
Oh, you, sir. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was the question?
So we have a college student who is dealing with back-to-back burnout issues and would like some tips and advice on how to manage that when it seems like, you know, you're having to jump one hurdle after another, you're not really catching a break.
Yeah. Again, I think setting aside time, so not allowing yourself again to be just reactive to what's going on. College, where you are busy socially, academically, and extracurricularly, is a difficult time to manage diabetes as you're sort of taking everything as it comes. And so I really, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. Take some time, schedule some time to sort of really think about diabetes and really decrease the amount of the anxiety and the amount of reactivity you have to bring to it. So again, I know there's a whole lot going on and it can seem like it's never ending. So try and be proactive and spend some time on the front end to determine, you know, what is this week coming up? You know, am I going to these parties? Am I eating this food? Do I have these tests coming up? You know, what are problem times for me? What are situations, you know, am I going to get less sleep, and try to kind of come up with a game plan that you can kind of tinker with over the course of the week, as opposed to, again, looking at your glucometer, looking at your continuous monitor, and just sort of seeing what's happening and hope for the best.
Wow, thank you for that. Austin, I would love your weigh in on this, because not only did you go through undergrad, you did law school. And I have a couple of friends who've gone through law school, and law school is tough. Like, extra kudos for you, because it couldn't be me. So I would love to know what your tips would be for someone going through school.
Yeah, college is definitely hard, and it can be scary just going to college without diabetes. So I think there's two practical tips that I can give there. Is depending upon the size of your school, there's probably other type 1 diabetics at your school. So linking arms with them. When I was in school, we had like different group pages that we were added to. So it might be nice to just send a random message on that, like, hey, any other type 1 diabetics out there, and see where that gets you. If you don't get any responses from that, another great option is to always link arms with your friends around you. Share what's going on in your life. Say, hey, I'm struggling right here. If you wouldn't mind, you know, helping me with this. Show them your diabetes tech. Show them what you go through on a daily basis. Show them how, you know, if you're at a party or you're drinking or something like that, show them how to use a glucagon or the new nasal injection. The more that you share and the more that you put out there, the more of a community that you're going to be able to build. So by sharing yourself and trying to connect with others, you're going to take some of that burnout feeling that you're having, and be able to have other people pour into your life. And I think that can be really helpful.
Awesome. Thank you for that perspective. That's really, really great. Mila, would love to hear your advice. And I actually have a special question that I think you could give some great perspective on. So what would be some advice that you give to, someone in school and they're, experiencing back-to-back burnout? And then I have a specific question on how can I show my son more compassion in the middle of the frustration with diabetes?
So my son's going to be starting college, but I have my two older sons are already in college, and having a close group of friends, I think it's vital. Letting them and also letting them know, like, hey, today it's not a good day. I'm feeling down, and also having them like understand what's going on and why do you feel like that. Maybe take 30 minutes, sit down and write down what are the things that you think are causing your diabetes management to be harder. Is it the food? Is it the hours? Is it my schedule or things like that? Because if you are going through that alone, it's going to be even worse. And the only person that's going to get affected, it's you. And that's what we're here for. We want to make sure that everyone knows where to find the resources or where to go and what to do, because we understand mental health. You don't have to live with type 1 to have like a very difficult time if you have any mental health issues, and adding type 1, it's a big burden. And can you please repeat the second question, because I didn't hear it?
Yeah, so the second question is, how can I show my son more compassion in the middle of the frustration?
Yikes, that's a tough one. I think you have to be very open with your kids. You have to explain them, and they have to see and understand your vulnerability as a parent, because it can be very difficult. It can be scary. Someone asked here in the chat if it's easier to get diagnosed at a younger age or later in your life. In our case, since my son was diagnosed at 3, he says, you know what, I don't know how to live with that without my type 1. And sometimes I feel that's a blessing in disguise, because he knows other teens that have been diagnosed later in life, and they are still struggling to get like this new routine in terms of how I'm going to be a teen, but I also need to manage my type 1. So you have to be very open. You have to talk to them. Finding them other kids with type 1, it's also a great opportunity for them to open themselves. I never thought my son would need that. I have 3 sons. They're very close in age. They're very close in everything. They're always together. And it wasn't until my son was like 8 that we attended a diabetes conference for families. When the last day we were at the conference, my son looked at us and he's like, why we haven't been here before? And we're like, what do you mean? He's like, there are so many kids like me. I want to keep coming every single time, every single year. So we understood that he needed to be with his peers. He needed to see other kids just like him. Even though he'd never showed like any signs of burnout, he never was he's been the best patient as me as his mom doctor. He never complains, but he felt something different. And of course, we cannot walk in his shoes. We can try to understand what he goes through every day, but for him to see other kids and to talk to them and to share like, hey, this is how I manage my type 1 at school, or this is how I do when I have a game. I think that's very important. We have to understand that they need to learn how to live through their lives with this disease, and we're not going to be with them. Even though we would love to be with them the rest of our lives, there's a point in their life that they have to take care of themselves. And I think that being very patient, we need a lot of patience as parents, and we need to try to understand that it's not an easy disease to live with.
Wow, thank you so much for that. I think, like you said, patience is a big one, especially for someone so young and they're trying to understand what this lifestyle kind of is. All right, so last kind of combo question for everybody. And Austin, I'll start with you. what is one piece of advice that you would give to someone who's experiencing burnout for the first time? And what advice would you give to their friends, family, or support system on how to help them as they're going through burnout?
Yes. So the piece of advice that I would give is to treat every single problem that you think is a big problem like a small problem. Take that first step to the direction that you want to be going, because if you could solve that problem in one go, you already would have. So take those small steps to accomplishing the goal that you want to have, whether that's a lower A1C, just better diabetes management in general. Just start small and you will be shocked by the results. For friends and family, I think that avoiding being overly critical and finding nuanced ways to support your loved ones can be incredibly valuable. Find ways that work for that person in your life to communicate the effects that you want them to actually have, because everybody has different communication styles and will feel supported and will be able to overcome their burnout difficulties in different ways. So that's my advice.
Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate those thoughts. Dr. Roy, what would be the advice that you give to someone experiencing burnout for the first time? And what advice would you give to their support system and how they can help them?
Yeah. So again, sort of recognizing what the classic signs and symptoms are. So do they feel like they're being depleted? They have less mental energy? Are they feeling detached? Are they having, a lot of cynicism or kind of negative feelings around it? And ultimately, is their efficacy falling? Are they not able to take care of themselves as well as they, were previously, or as well as you went to expect? And so I think the question is sort of, works in itself, because that immediate support system is going to be very important. I think being very open and honest, about those feelings and those emotions, is this a one-time thing, or are we establishing a pattern here and kind of coming up with the game plan together? Burnout isn't necessarily causative, but it seems to be correlative with other kind of major chronic mental health illnesses such as depression and anxiety. So being very conscious of how those other symptoms or illnesses may be affected. Is their mood worsening? Are they less interested in things that normally bring them joy? May they even have suicidal ideation? Are they having increased panic attacks or increased anxiety, insomnia? What can also be shown is as you improve burnout, those other illnesses and some symptoms tend to improve as well. And so I think the best thing you can do, immediately is to have a support around you and to educate and kind of have those honest conversations. And then, I think the thresholds to be very low to include a mental health provider once you have issues, or once you feel like these symptoms last a long enough time for you to kind of raise an antenna. So definitely use sort of the self-care and coping mechanisms we've talked a lot about, but definitely involve a professional if these symptoms are kind of persevering.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Kiyomi, I would love what your advice would be to somebody experiencing burnout for the first time, and then what advice you would give to their support system on how they can help them.
My advice to someone that's experiencing burnout for the first time is definitely saying it's okay. It's okay to not be okay. And I always tell people you're stronger than you feel and you're more sure than you even know. Burnout is definitely also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to grow. It's an opportunity to learn more about your condition, learn more about your triggers, learn more about yourself, what you need, what you don't need. I think that it's also very difficult. So letting someone know that their feelings are valid and reassuring them that what they are feeling is real. I would also suggest that any family or friends ask questions to understand. As a diabetic, it gives us also an opportunity to teach and to educate in the midst of, our burnout, which also at times that can also be a little draining. But I think that if you have supportive friends and family, that's key. And having that support with those individuals that want to know, they'll ask questions to understand and to be as empathetic as possible. I would say empathy is really, really important. Listening is very important. Just making sure that you feel heard and you feel loved and you feel supported makes all the difference.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that advice. And last but not least, Mila, what advice would you give to someone experiencing burnout for the first time and advice for their support system to help them?
I would say seek help. It doesn't have to be professional help, but you need to talk to someone. If it's professional help, it's even better because then you learn what to do the next time this happens. It's something new. It's like diabetes. When you're recently diagnosed, you have no idea what to do or what to do if something happens. So seek for help, look for resources, talk to your friends and family. It's very easy for people that don't live with diabetes not to understand what a person with diabetes goes through every single day, because I might see it and see this beautiful plate of food, but my son might see it as, oh my God, how many carbs am I going to be high? Am I going to be low? So we have to be very mindful about that. And we have to understand that not everyone is well educated on how diabetes is managed and what a person with diabetes goes through every single day. So if you, and this is something that I think we've gone through, if you are going through diabetes burnout or you're going through a bad day and your friend says, hey, let's go out for pizza, he's not meaning it in a bad way. Maybe he feels, or maybe pizza is what makes him feel good. And we also have to give them a chance to understand what's going on in our lives. That's why communication is so important. And I know that when you're depressed, when your anxiety is over the roof, you don't want to talk to anyone, but that's only making things worse. And for family and caregivers, just be there. Even if the person doesn't want to talk a lot, just be there. Let them know, hey, I'm here. Whenever you're ready, I'm here. And just seek for that help and support.
Wow, thank you so much for that. I'll weigh in here. I think the piece of advice that I would give for those experiencing burnout is find the community. I've gained so much insight in finding the diabetic community, even though it took me some time. And don't worry about types. I think that was one of the big things that I did for myself, was I thought I couldn't talk to other, diabetics who were type 1 and I'm type 2 because we don't have the same experiences, but I later found out we do. And it was through a lot of my type 1 friends that I learned about a CGM, that I learned about seeing an endocrinologist and things like that. So when you're having those moments where it's hard, find anybody in the community. We are here, we are open, and we get it. And I think the thing that I would tell for friends and family is be willing to research on your own. To Kiyomi's point, it's a lot of emotional labor to explain something that you are living with every single day. And the small actions of keeping some candy on you, or, if you guys are out and stopping and saying, hey, just want to make sure you're doing okay, without making a big deal of it, definitely don't be like, should you be eating that? That's the worst thing to do. Please don't do that with anybody. Okay. So, but doing research and understanding ways that you can support, learning how to use a CGM, how to test, how to speak up for someone, especially if they're not wearing a medical bracelet, if something happens, it goes so far. Looks like we're all good to go. So Jordan, we'll hand things off back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Taylor. Thank you to all of you watching tonight. Thank you to this group of panelists for sharing your perspectives and your stories with us, for being vulnerable. We can't thank you enough for your vulnerability and your expertise, and just really respect you all for sharing so much with us. To all of you watching, we have 7 more community table conversations coming at you this year from Beyond Type 1. So please look out for registration for next month's conversation. It's going to be around the LGBTQ+ community and diabetes. It's going to be an awesome one, and I don't think you're going to want to miss it. So be on the lookout for that and more community table conversations all year long. Otherwise, definitely stay tuned into our channels and be on the lookout for new content from Beyond Type 1. We're going to be highlighting takeaways from this conversation in particular in this amazing group. So please stay tuned in. Once again, we just want to take some time to thank those who make these conversations possible. Community Table is presented by the JDRF-Beyond Type 1 Alliance and made possible by Abbott Diabetes Care, Dexcom, Lilly Diabetes, MannKind, Medtronic, Omnipod, Roche Diabetes Care, and Tandem. We'll see you all at the next community table. Thank you again to this incredible group, and have a great night, everyone. Bye.